Directly during a football match on the central grandstand of the sports arena on October 15, 1995, 5 kilograms of plastid are detonated in the city of Donetsk. This powerful explosion literally tears apart Akat Bragin, the godfather of the entire Donbass region, better known by the nickname Alik the Greek. However, the person who, by all rights, should have been next to him at that moment was not on the podium at that second. Rinat Akhmetov was delayed by the start of the game for exactly 5 minutes. This delay turned him into the wealthiest citizen of the state. In the year 2013, the capital of the offspring of an ordinary miner and a former nanny was estimated at $22 billion. This amount exceeded the financial estimates of Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia, if you put them together. This man was the rightful owner of numerous industrial plants, sea and river steamships, huge sports stadiums, and actually controlled the entire political class of the state, which even included the current president of the country, Viktor Yanukovych. However, the historical process is characterized by a tendency to irony. On the 24th of February, 2022, armored vehicles drove into a settlement that was a true jewel in its crown, Mariupol. The industrial giant Azovstal, which had been the heart of his financial empire, was reduced to rubble. In just one 12-month period of the armed conflict, Akhmetov lost 2/3 of his accumulated property. The person who controlled the entire Donbass eventually became his key victim. Either his untimely appearance on the sports arena in 1990 was an exceptionally lucky combination of circumstances, or it represented the icy calculation of an individual who knew for sure that the throne of power would soon be vacant. Perhaps Rinat Akhmetov is not just an entrepreneur, but the custodian of the collective treasury of the former Donetsk criminal group, who managed to legitimize bandit assets and transform them into respectable securities on the London Stock Exchange. There is an official paper of the Ministry of the Interior dated 1994, which miraculously survived in archival vaults. In operational reports, Akhmetov's last name is mentioned not as a businessman, but as a professional gambler, a master of card games. He did not privatize production facilities. He got his initial financial resources during card games, playing a big game with Moscow underground dealers and Donetsk criminals. His business structure is built on excitement and virtuoso bluff skills. Akhmetov's biography is a chronicle of Ukraine itself. This is a thorny path from the chaotic accumulation of material wealth through the bloody events of the 90s to the desire to become a representative of the European aristocracy. And today, we will answer the key question. For what reason did the actual owner of Donbass, with his own paramilitary guards and billions of resources, not stop the outbreak of war in the year 2014? Why did he choose to sound the alarm horn of his enterprises instead of handing out weapons to the workers? Many believe that he lost absolutely everything. However, just look at the current Forbes magazine listings. Akhmetov still occupies the first place. His energy holding company, DTEC, provides electricity to our apartments, and the metal he produces is used to rebuild destroyed bridge crossings. Large empires do not cease to exist from detonations. They undergo a process of transformation. And Rinat Akhmetov, who successfully survived the criminal clashes, the periods of the rule of Yanukovych and Poroshenko, is once again leading his difficult party. But this time, it's not the banknotes that are at stake, but survival itself. To understand the phenomenon of Rinat Akhmetov, it is necessary to mentally transfer to Donetsk in the early 90s. It was a settlement that existed according to its own unwritten rules, a kind of autonomy within the country, where the powers of law enforcement agencies were revoked at dusk. The real rulers of the region were not government employees, but people in leather jackets, united in a powerful criminal organization called Lux. At the top of this hierarchy was Akat Bragin, the legendary Alik the Greek, a former meat trader at the market who turned into the uncrowned monarch of Donbass. Young Rinat Akhmetov was Bragin's closest associate. They were not just business partners, but also natives of the same village of Oktyabrski, close neighbors and comrades. Bragin saw a hidden potential in the young and taciturn young man. Akhmetov did not drink alcohol, did not take illegal substances, had an exceptional memory and analytical mindset. While other group leaders settled disputes using physical force, Akhmetov solved them by building complex combinations. He acted as the intellectual center of the association, its main financial manager. The 15th of October, 1995, became the date that divided the Chronicle of Donetsk into periods before and after. On that autumn day, a crucial match was planned at the Shakhtar Stadium. Akat Bragin, being the head of the club and the main patron of the city, was obliged to be in a special box for honored guests. The entire regional elite understood that being next to a Greek at a football spectacle is a manifestation of the highest trust and a sign of a special status. The attackers approached the task with the utmost cynicism. 5 kilograms of explosives were embedded in the concrete structure of the steps directly at the entrance to the lodge. The infernal machine was activated by a radio signal at the very second when Bragan, accompanied by personal guards, stepped onto the staircase. The detonation was so powerful that the remains of the ruler of Donbass could be identified solely by a gold Rolex watch, which was found 50 meters from the scene. 5 security personnel lost their lives along with him. But where was Renat at that time? According to official information, he ended up in a traffic jam. According to another version, he had a premonition of danger and deliberately slowed down the movement. The only thing that remains obvious is that he arrived at the arena a few minutes after the incident, found clouds of smoke, general panic, and fragments of bodies. At that moment, the 29-year-old young man realized that he was completely alone. The entire old guard was eliminated in a one-time strike. An abyss of power opened up in front of him, which he either had to seize immediately or die following his patron. In the shadow world, the absence of a leader is always made up for by bloodshed. Everyone around was anticipating the start of a large-scale battle for Bragan's assets. Thieves in law in the capital Dnepropetrovsk groups, local radical elements, all claimed the property of the Lux Empire. However, there was no armed confrontation. Rinat Akhmetov managed to beat all his opponents. He did not resort to weapons. He committed an act that no one could have predicted. He took over the reins with the icy composure of an experienced grandmaster. On the very first day after the funeral ceremony, he summoned all the important figures of the region to the Lux residence, a former hotel complex in the Botanical Garden, converted into an impregnable fortress. It is not known for certain exactly what words were heard behind the tightly closed doors, but when the meeting ended, all the criminal authorities, officials, and heads of industrial facilities recognized the young Akhmetov as the new sole leader. He provided them with guarantees of security and income preservation in exchange for unquestioning obedience. The psychological portrait of Akhmetov at that time was revealed as clearly as possible. He wasn't an ordinary bandit looking for disorder. He sought to establish a clear, rigid, authoritarian, and virtually feudal system. He realized that legalization was necessary to survive and save capital. It was necessary to change sports attire to strict suits and to transfer the solution of issues from the forests to the official offices of the leaders. The explosion in the sports arena ended the life of Alik the Greek, but marked the birth of Rinat Leonidovich. It was then, while at the burial place of his mentor, that he made a firm decision to build an empire of a fundamentally different format. An organization where power is determined not by the number of firearms, but by the market value of assets. He took control of the Shakhtar football team, occupied the Lux residence, and, most importantly, inherited the unspoken status of the master of Donbass. The circumstances of his miraculous rescue have generated debate to this day. His detractors claimed that his tardiness looked suspiciously timely, but no actual evidence of Akhmetov's involvement in Bragan's liquidation could be found. Most likely, it was the dictate of fate, Providence, which saved him from more significant achievements than the role of the former butcher's assistant. It saved him in order for him to become the wealthiest man in the entire history of Ukraine. There is an old American saying attributed to Rockefeller: "I'm ready to account for every million I have, except for the first one." In the situation with Rinat Akhmetov, this statement takes on a literal, almost criminal connotation. The official biography states that he formed the startup capital by establishing the Donetsk City Bank in the 95th year. However, everyone who lived in Donbass at that time is aware that the bank was not the starting point, but the final stage of the procedure for legitimizing huge amounts of cash, the origin of which is still shrouded in myths. The most stable and embellished legend says that Rinat Akhmetov was a professional card player who played in the major leagues. In the late Soviet period and the early 90s, it was a closed community. They weren't playing the game for fun, but for fortunes. It is said that young Rinat had phenomenal memorization abilities, could hold cards that came out of a deck in his head, and calculate the chances of success with mathematical precision. He traveled to Moscow and Sochi, where he beat underground millionaires and criminal leaders, returning to Donetsk with bags full of money. This version clarifies a lot about his business practices. Akhmetov has never been a production worker in the traditional sense of the word. He did not work at the machine. He always perceived commercial activity as a large-scale poker game. He was able to bluff, raise the stakes when others lost their nerve, and take the whole pot when opponents admitted defeat. But you can't buy an industrial giant with cards alone. A well-established system was required, and Akhmetov, together with his deceased partner Bragin, formed a structure that subjugated the entire region. This association was called ARS, after the initial letters of the names Alik, Rinat, Samson. The economic system of Ukraine in the 90s was in a state of deep decline. Cash was rapidly depreciating, businesses were idle, and miners had not received remuneration for their work for months. The state was dominated by barter, and it was on this basis that the model was built that turned yesterday's bandits into oligarchs. The scheme functioned extremely simply and ruthlessly. Coal enterprises needed finance or food. Akhmetov's organizations supplied food, clothing, and machinery to the mines at inflated prices, and in return, they seized coal at extremely low prices. But coal itself is just black dust. Metal is needed to obtain hard currency, and to produce metal from ore, coke is required. Whoever kept the coke production under control had the entire metallurgical industry by the throat. Akhmetov realized this before the others. While the Red directors, representatives of the former Soviet nomenclature, tried to plunder metal through the passageways, Akhmetov's people bought up or took control of coke chemical enterprises. Avdiivka Coke, which is the largest on the European continent, has become a true jewel of its assets. Having gained power over this industry bottleneck, Akhmetov turned to the heads of the metallurgical giants Azovstal and the Ilyich Combine with an unequivocal proposal. Either you operate through us and receive the raw materials, or your units will stop working tomorrow. The termination of the blast furnace operation inevitably leads to its destruction. The directors had no alternative. This created a vertically integrated structure: coal, coke, metal, seaport, and foreign exchange earnings. All income was concentrated in the hands of the new Donetsk elite, while losses and environmental damage fell on the shoulders of the state. To ensure the safety of this model, a political cover was required, and at that moment, a person appears on the foreground, without whom Akhmetov's meteoric rise would have been impossible: Viktor Yanukovych. In the 97th year, this little-known official with 2 criminal records in his biography was appointed head of the Donetsk Regional Administration. Their partnership was the perfect interaction. Akhmetov provided financial resources and security support. Yanukovych ensured the use of administrative levers. The head of the region, Yanukovych, carried out a harsh cleansing of the region from the competitors of the Donetsk group. Outside entrepreneurs were simply not allowed in the region. There were secret checkpoints on the borders of the region. Any businessman from Kiev or Dnepropetrovsk who tried to gain a foothold in the Donbass market was putting himself at serious risk. Donetsk was transformed into a private domain, a separate economic territory where the only law prevailed: the word of Rinat. By the beginning of the 2000 years, the stage of primary capital accumulation was completed. Traces of blood on the roads disappeared, replaced by signatures on official contracts. In the 2000th year, Akhmetov founded an organization called SCM, System Capital Management. It was no longer the group's general cash register, but a Western-type business structure. It includes enterprises that were considered national property yesterday. The ideology of this period is cynical to the extreme. State assets were transferred to private ownership not through transparent bidding, but through hidden mechanisms, pressure, and debt obligations. Akhmetov did not build these plants from scratch. He carried out their takeover, taking advantage of the confusion caused by the collapse of a great power. He became the main beneficiary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And while the mine workers were banging their helmets on the squares, demanding payment of the money they earned, the man in charge of their businesses was purchasing luxury real estate in London. A card player has hit the jackpot, becoming the sole owner of an entire region. By the middle of the first decade of the 2000th, Rinat Akhmetov became cramped in the territorial framework of Donbass. His commercial structure had grown to such a scale that it needed not just a loyal governor, but its own head of state. In Ukraine, entrepreneurship has never existed separately from politics, but Akhmetov brought this merger to an absolute state. He turned the Party of Regions into the most profitable joint stock company in the country. It was not a political organization in the classical sense, but a closed community of investors, where the decisive vote belonged to a respected person from Donetsk. The invested funds brought results in the 2010 year. Viktor Yanukovych has won the presidential race. For millions of citizens, it looked like a revenge of one political force over another. But for Rinat Akhmetov, It meant the completion of the largest merger and acquisition deal in the annals of Eastern Europe. He actually took the state of Ukraine on a long-term lease for 5 years. Immediately after the inauguration ceremony, the era of large-scale redistribution of resources began. Akhmetov's priority goal was the energy sector. He realized that metal prices are subject to fluctuations in the global market, whereas citizens will always pay for electricity and heating at any rate. This is how an industrial giant called DTEK emerged. Taking advantage of the absolute location of the anti-monopoly authorities and the State Property Management Agency, Akhmetov's structures began buying up state-owned thermal power plants and distribution networks. The parameters of the privatization tenders were drawn up specifically for a specific applicant. There were often situations when only Akhmetov's company participated in the bidding, which acquired a strategic object at the lowest starting price. By the year 2013, DTEK controlled about 70% of all thermal generation in the state. In fact, Akhmetov got access to the main switch of the country. He had the ability at any moment to leave the state without electricity or dictate his tariff terms to the cabinet of ministers. And the cost of services has been steadily increasing. The Rotterdam Plus mechanism, introduced later, became a clear example of how a monopoly structure forces the entire population to provide it with excess income. However, his interests were not limited to coal and electricity. In the 2011 year, the privatization of Ukrtelecom, the telecommunications giant that managed the entire cable infrastructure of the country, took place. This asset, created by the efforts of many generations of Soviet citizens, passed into private hands according to a veiled scheme, the traces of which led to offshore zones of Cyprus, and from there to the representative offices of SCM. The state has lost the levers of managing the country's information system, receiving in return negligible amounts in comparison with the true price of the object. Akhmetov's behavior at this time is the tactic of a gambler who has won everything and now intends to acquire the gambling establishment itself. He was no longer just a wealthy man. It has become an independent institution of government. His henchmen led ministries, tax and customs departments. He himself did not seek to hold public office. His short tenure as a deputy was more of a burden, which he hurried to get rid of. However, his real weight exceeded that of the president. Yanukovych acted as the public face of the government, but the financial resources of this government were at the disposal of Akhmetov. During this period, Donetsk became a showcase of financial success. The city was ablaze with lights, high-rise buildings were being built, and luxury hotels were opening. The main achievement was the Donbass Arena, the best stadium in Eastern Europe, which cost $400 million to build. Akhmetov organized performances of world stars like Beyoncé and Rihanna in Donetsk, and acquired Brazilian football players for tens of millions. He created a semblance of Dubai in the midst of a depressed industrial region. It was like feasting during a disaster. While the elite spent time in luxurious lodges, ordinary miners continued to work in dangerous mines for meager wages. The social gap has reached its limits. Akhmetov created an appearance of prosperity, but this prosperity affected only an extremely limited circle of people. He sincerely believed that Shakhtar's sporting achievements could replace decent living and social justice for people. He was sure that he had gained the sympathies of the region in the same way that he had acquired industrial facilities. The year 2013 was the peak of Rinat Akhmetov's power. His assets were estimated at $22 billion. He was one of the richest inhabitants of the planet. He had everything at his disposal: power, finances, a reputation as a philanthropist, and absolute security. It seemed that this business empire would last forever, like the ancient pyramids. No one, including the owner himself, noticed the signs of impending disaster, which was already beginning to undermine the foundations of this building. The meaning of this tragedy lies in the fact that, having subjugated state institutions, the oligarchs deprived the country of protective mechanisms. The state, which serves the interests of one individual, inevitably weakens. When the period of turmoil, the Maidan, and then the armed conflict came, it turned out that there was no one to protect such a system. The armed forces were weakened, the security agencies were plagued by corruption, and the population disliked the leadership. Akhmetov built a golden castle on shaky ground, and the first historical upheaval destroyed this foundation, leaving the ruler among the ruins. February 2014. Viktor Yanukovych, fearing for his life and the safety of his property, is hiding in Russia. In Kiev, the Maidan is gaining the upper hand, which Rinat Akhmetov supported in recent days, trying to diversify risks, but which was inherently alien to him. There is a power vacuum in Donetsk. Law enforcement officers are demoralized, the bureaucracy is in turmoil, all eyes are turned towards the luxury residents. Everyone is waiting for the decision of the actual owner of the region. At that time, Akhmetov had all the necessary resources to suppress separatist sentiments at the very beginning. He had his own security service, comparable to a regular military unit. He had tens of thousands of workers under his command, who could take to the streets at the first signal and liquidate any protest camps. However, Akhmetov remained silent. He did not order the liberation of the regional administration building, which was seized by the radicals in early March. For what reason? The most common version among experts says that Akhmetov decided to resort to his favorite tactic, bidding. He did not perceive the self-proclaimed leaders as a real threat. He saw them as a lever of pressure on Kiev. His calculation was cynical. I will demonstrate to the new leadership in the capital that without my participation, they will lose control over Donbass. Let them feel fear and provide me with guarantees of immunity, special benefits, and the right to determine the power in the region alone. This represented a strategy of controlled disorder. Akhmetov was playing a double game. Officially, his representatives negotiated with Turchinov and Yatsenyuk about the integrity of the country. And in the evening, he personally visited the occupied administration building and told the protesters, "Friends, I am on your side, but let's do without bloodshed." He believed that he was keeping the situation under control, that the masked men were his charges, just overly emotional. He believed that financial injections would solve any problems, and at the right moment, he would simply outbid the leaders of the movement, or send them home. This was a fatal mistake. Akhmetov did not take into account a circumstance that did not fit into his commercial model: the factor of external force intervention. In April, a unit under the command of Igor Gherkin arrived in Slavyansk. They were trained saboteurs, ideological supporters, and mercenaries. These people did not need Akhmetov's financial resources. Their goal was the war and the creation of a new state entity. The situation is out of control. The puppets cut the strings and turned their weapons against whoever was trying to manipulate them. The culmination of the oligarchs' helplessness was the action on May 20th, called the Akhmetov's Horn. Realizing that the armed formations did not intend to leave, but were starting looting, Akhmetov called on the workers to launch a warning strike. At noon, sirens were turned on at all his enterprises. The drivers clicked on the car's beeps. The inscription, "For Peace," appeared on the board of the Donbass arena. It looked impressive on TV screens, but it was extremely weak in reality. Akhmetov made factory noise against the armed men. Representatives of the self-proclaimed structures only laughed at this action. They realized that their former greatness was lost, and he wasn't ready to use force. But they did. On that day, the legend of the omnipotence of the master of Donbass was finally dispelled. The residents of Donetsk, who expected real protection from him, saw only a beautiful PR move that hid emptiness and fears. A few days after this event, armed detachments arrived at Akhmetov's residence. They demanded that taxes be paid in their favor. Rinat Leonidovich, a man who had kept the entire region in fear for 2 decades, was forced to leave his home. He was heading to football in Kiev, believing that he would be back in a week. He didn't take many personal items with him. There are unique cars in its garages and luxurious chandeliers in its halls. He never set foot in that house again. Akhmetov lost Donetsk not because of weakness, but because of overconfidence. He tried to use corporate pressure techniques in a struggle for existence. He believed he was negotiating assets while the battle for history was taking place. He sought to gain a special status for Donbass in order to rule there as a prince. And as a result, he received a territory where field commanders who are indifferent to stock market reports are in charge. The essence of this failure is a lesson for any major owner. Capital has no power against ideology and weapons. Finance is effective only where the rules are followed, even if they are unspoken. Where there are no rules, the billionaire becomes a hostage or an exile. Akhmetov managed to save his life and business structures in the controlled territories, but he lost his foundation, his hometown. From that moment on, he became the wealthiest migrant in Ukraine. His stadium was overgrown with weeds, his apartment was looted, and his name became a symbol of apostasy in Donetsk. For some, because they couldn't hold the city; for others, because they allowed the war to happen and fled. The signal of fate sounded to him like a farewell melody. In the year 2015, it seemed that Rinat Akhmetov's structure was living out its last days. He lost his businesses in Donbass, his home was seized, and there were calls in society to limit the influence of the oligarchs. Activists called him an accomplice of the enemy, insisting on the transfer of DTEC to state ownership. However, Akhmetov confirmed that he is not just a businessman, but an unsinkable political player. He managed to find the key to the new administration, and this tool was not ideological proximity, but mathematical calculation. In March 2000, the state regulator approved the procedure for determining the cost of coal, known as Rotterdam Plus. The meaning of this model was striking in its audacity. The electricity tariff for factories and ordinary citizens included the price of coal as if it were delivered from a port in the Netherlands. At the same time, the costs of sea transportation and port fees were added to the cost. What was the deception? The fact is that no coal was actually supplied to Ukraine from Europe. DTEK's thermal power plants continued to use local raw materials. Some of it was mined in legal mines in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and some, and this is the main secret of that period, were imported by hidden routes from uncontrolled territories under the guise of Ukrainian or Russian. There was a huge profit. Akhmetov extracted coal at a low cost, conditionally for 1,000 hryvnias, and sold it to the state and the population through a tariff at the price of a European hub, for 2,000 or 3,000. The difference was at the disposal of DTEK. According to anti-corruption authorities, during the operation of this model, consumers have overpaid about 39 billion hryvnias. These were funds withdrawn from the budget of a belligerent state and placed at the disposal of one person. However, such a combination cannot be achieved without top-level support, and here we see an unexpected alliance. Petro Poroshenko, who publicly promised to eradicate the influence of the oligarchs, actually became a participant in the process of saving Akhmetov. Informed sources claim that there is an unspoken agreement. Akhmetov benefits from Rotterdam Plus, and in return provides support to the president's entourage and provides resources for political initiatives. The armed conflict has become for this union not an obstacle, but an additional opportunity. While the battles were taking place on the front line, coal trains were moving across the contact line. This was called blood trading. Akhmetov provided payments to miners in the occupied areas. Until 2000, his facilities there functioned officially, deducted taxes to the Ukrainian budget, but actually supported the economy of the self-proclaimed structures, and income from the use of these raw materials was legalized in the capital through inflated tariffs. Akhmetov's behavior during this period resembles the tactics of a chameleon. He has completely updated his public image. He turned from a Donetsk leader into a supporter of European investments. His charitable organization distributed aid to millions of people in need, shaping the image of the only defender. Akhmetov's food packages have indeed saved many elderly people from destitution. But it is also true that these resources accounted for only a small fraction of the excess profits generated by the monopoly in the energy sector. By the year 2019, by the time Poroshenko's term ended, Akhmetov had not only regained his position, but also increased his influence. He controlled 80% of thermal generation, 80% of coal production, and a significant segment of the media market. His TV channel became the leader of views. The Rotterdam Plus model allowed him to compensate for the loss of assets in Donetsk at the expense of all citizens. The essence of this page of history is frightening. The tragedy, which became a disaster for millions, turned into a commercial project for the oligarchic structures. Akhmetov demonstrated that capital is not burdened with moral principles. He goes to where the profitability is higher. If an agreement with the opponent is required to make a profit, it will be reached. If it is necessary to enlist the support of the government, it will be bought. The Rotterdam Plus mechanism was cancelled only in the year 2019, under external pressure and with the advent of the new Zelensky administration. But no one was held responsible. The investigation was stopped and resumed until it finally died down in the courts. The funds were withdrawn, cleaned up, and invested in new areas: environmental energy, real estate abroad, and support for new politicians. Akhmetov once again emerged from the situation without loss, confirming that in the hierarchy of the state, he is outside the law. After the loss of Donetsk in 1914, Rinat Akhmetov turned Mariupol into his new stronghold. This seaside town became a demonstration of the capabilities of his empire. The football club's office was moved here. Billions of hryvnias were sent here for the development of the urban environment. Akhmetov sought to show the residents of captured Donetsk, located just 100 kilometers away. Look at the standard of living with me in Ukraine, and compare it with your situation. Mariupol was developing. Two industrial giants, the Ilyich Combine and the legendary Azovstal, provided the bulk of Metinvest Holdings' foreign exchange earnings. On February 24, 2022, this showcase was destroyed. The Russian armed forces, whom Akhmetov had long viewed as business partners, He had been supplying metal to a neighboring country for years, surrounded the city with incredible speed. The siege began, turning the flourishing center into a closed area and then into a place of mass graves. For Akhmetov, the battle for Mariupol turned into a personal tragedy. The troops did not just occupy his enterprises, they methodically destroyed them. Azovstal, a fortress factory with an extensive system of underground structures, has become the final frontier of the Ukrainian defense. It was there, in the shelters under the workshops that yesterday produced steel for global construction projects, that the defenders held their positions. The irony of the circumstances was cruel. The factory, built in Soviet times as an impregnable facility, was destroyed by the heirs of the same system. Aviation used heavy-duty ammunition capable of piercing the thickness of concrete. Akhmetov watched the liquidation of his property in real time. Each strike on Azovstal meant not only the death of people, but also the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. Two Mariupol enterprises provided 40% of the total steel production in the country. With their loss, Medinvest transformed from a global player into a regional entity struggling for existence. However, it was in Mariupol that a change took place in the oligarch himself. If in the 14th year he limited himself to the Horn, then in the 22nd his position became very clear. Akhmetov openly called the leadership of the neighboring country criminal, and the country itself an aggressor. He declared, "Mariupol is Ukraine, and we will rebuild it after the end of the conflict." Critics will point out that he simply has no other way left. The missile strikes did not choose between the property of an oligarch and the housing of a worker. The war has destroyed the field for maneuvers. It is impossible to have a dialogue with someone who is leveling your business with the ground. Akhmetov realized that there was no place for him in the new reality. Only loyal managers and state corporations are provided there. His autonomy, his weight, his finances, all of this would be subject to seizure. For this reason, he became a patriot, not out of inner conviction, but based on the interests of his capital, which was burning in the flames of Mariupol. In 2000, Forbes estimated Akhmetov's losses at $9 billion. However, the figures do not reflect the full depth of the fall. He didn't just lose his money, he lost his territory. Donetsk was lost in the 14th, Mariupol in the 22nd. The ruler of Donbass no longer has Donbass itself. He became a monarch without possessions, a leader without a team of thousands. The destruction of Azovstal has become a symbol of the end of an entire era, a time when large owners considered themselves invulnerable. It turned out that even colossal funds are not able to stop an aircraft bomb. It turned out that it is possible to influence politicians and judges, but it is impossible to ensure security if your opponent is aiming at your complete destruction. The heart of Akhmetov's empire stopped in May of the 22nd year, when the last defenders left the factory. Today, the ruins of the enterprise tower on the coast as a monument to human ambition and cruelty. Akhmetov initiated a lawsuit against Russia in the International Court of Justice, demanding compensation in the tens of billions. But even if he succeeded, no one would return him to the world where he was the rightful master. Mariupol has demonstrated that in the face of a large-scale war, an oligarch is as defenseless as an ordinary person who has lost his home. The only difference is that the refugee has only one suitcase left, while Akhmetov still has billions in bank accounts. However, with these funds, he is no longer able to purchase a return to the past. After the events in Mariupol, Rinat Akhmetov found himself in an extremely difficult situation. Its production facilities were destroyed, logistics was paralyzed, and its political weight was melting away every day. In the new conditions, when the only decision-making center has been formed in the state, there is no place left for the former oligarchic combinations. And Akhmetov committed an act that amazed many. He chose to go into the shadows. On the 11th of July, 2022, something happened that previously seemed unthinkable. Rinat Akhmetov announced a complete termination of his participation in the media business. In one day, he eliminated his main instrument of influence, the Ukraine Media Group. The TV channels that had been at the top of the ratings for years and served his political goals had stopped working. The broadcasting permits were transferred to the state. 4,000 employees were out of work. For what reason did he take this step? The motive was purely practical. The head of state signed an act on limiting the influence of the oligarchs. According to the document, a person is recognized as an oligarch if he meets 3 of the 4 conditions: participation in political life, monopoly position, significant wealth, and ownership of the media. Inclusion in the register of oligarchs would mean serious problems for Akhmetov in the international arena. He would have been denied access to credit resources, and his accounts would have been subjected to total control. Akhmetov, as a sophisticated gambler, got rid of the most dangerous asset. He voluntarily resigned as a media mogul in order to preserve his reputation as an international entrepreneur. He sacrificed his information weapon, television, to save his main shield, foreign assets. It was harsh on the staff, but the only right decision to save their capital. At the same time, Akhmetov launched a large-scale program to support the armed forces. The Steel Front initiative became his way of making amends for previous mistakes. The enterprises of Metinvest, which had previously worked for export, switched to the production of protective plates. Every 10th bulletproof vest in the Army today is made of Akhmetov steel. His specialists have created special metal modules, capable of protecting the lives of soldiers in the trenches. The total amount of assistance provided by its structures for defense needs has exceeded 3 billion hryvnias and continues to increase. Skeptics will notice. He is simply buying off the claims of society. He seeks to erase the memory of the events of the 14th year and confirm his loyalty with financial injections. Perhaps this is true, but for a fighter on the front line, the motives of a billionaire do not matter if the protection provided saves his life. Akhmetov has learned the lesson of the past. Then he tried to balance between the parties and eventually lost his home. In the 22nd year, he made an unequivocal choice. He realized that if the country was defeated, he would lose absolutely everything. His remaining property will simply be seized, as it has already happened in Donetsk. His only opportunity to save capital is the success of Ukraine and its movement towards Europe. For this reason, he became the largest private sponsor of the army. There has been a lull in relations with the government leadership. The war pushed old feuds to the background. The authorities need Akhmetov's resources to ensure the defense and functioning of the energy sector. Akhmetov needs guarantees of stability and lack of pressure. An unspoken agreement on mutual non-aggression was established between them. Akhmetov no longer criticizes the leadership, and there are no platforms for this. The channels are closed. In turn, the authorities are not taking steps to nationalize his property. Psychologically, Rinat Leonidovich is now in a state of deep defense. He is no longer the sole master of Donbass or the entire country. He is a major investor seeking to preserve the remnants of his fleet in a storm. He began to behave much more modestly. He stopped giving public comments, disappeared from the information field. He realized that in wartime, large finances require not only silence, but also the absence of unnecessary attention. His current tactics are to wait out difficult times, preserve the foundation of the business, energy, agricultural assets, remnants of metallurgy, and wait for the stage of state reconstruction. He understands that reconstruction will require millions of tons of building materials and metal, and he intends to be the one to ensure these supplies. Akhmetov is playing the game for a long time again, but now his arguments are not hidden schemes, but real assistance to the front and humanitarian projects. He is trying to secure a place for himself in the future, paying for it with a part of his past legacy. If you ask yourself what Rinat Akhmetov values above money, the answer is unequivocal: football. For him, the Shakhtar Club has never been just an entertainment or commercial facility. It was his passion, his conviction, and most importantly, his main tool for influencing society. Through sports, he influenced the moods of millions of citizens. Through football, he built a reputation for himself in the West, transforming from an ambiguous figure of the 90s into a respected European-level leader. The peak of this path was the 20th of May 2009 of the year. In Istanbul, Shakhtar won the UEFA Cup, becoming the only team in independent Ukraine to receive the European trophy. Akhmetov did not hide his tears that evening. The man who saw off his colleagues with cold calmness and seized factories succumbed to feelings. This victory gave the residents of Donetsk something that the state could not provide: a sense of pride. Akhmetov inspired the industrial region with a sense of its exceptional importance. The well-known phrase that "the region does not fail" has become the slogan of the triumphalists. The symbol of this greatness has become the Donbass Arena. The $400 million stadium resembled a space object in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood. It was a place where people expressed gratitude to their patron. Akhmetov applied the ancient principle of providing the population with food and circuses. While the miners' incomes remained low, he provided them with a world-class show. Foreign football stars, acquired for huge sums, demonstrated their skills on the Donetsk field, making people forget about everyday difficulties. However, in the year 2014, this ideal was instantly destroyed. The war, which Akhmetov could not prevent, dealt a blow to his main hobby. The stadium was shelled. Its glass structures were damaged, and the field fell into disrepair. The club lost its home. The period of forced displacement has begun. At first, the team settled in Lviv. It was a difficult test. The Donetsk Club, which was viewed warily in the western part of the country, performed in front of an audience that was not always friendly. The players, who were used to everyone's support, felt uncomfortable. Akhmetov continued to allocate funds, spending millions on a team that could not play in his hometown. For him, abandoning Shakhtar would mean admitting complete collapse. The club became a reflection of the fate of the owner himself. From a wealthy leader, he turned into an association of immigrants. Tactics have also changed. If Akhmetov had previously acquired celebrities, now he began to sell them for the sake of survival. A striking example of the new reality was the transfer of Mikhail Mudryk to Chelsea in London in January 2000. The contract amount was €100 million, which was a record for the country. But the most important thing was the allocation of these funds. Akhmetov announced that he was sending 1 billion hryvnias, or $25 million, from this deal to support the defenders of Mariupol and their families. It was a significant gesture. The funds received from the sport went to the needs of those who defended the remnants of its industrial might. The process has ended. Football has stopped being just a game and has become part of the struggle. Today, Shakhtar holds meetings in Kiev or abroad, but Akhmetov continues to assert, "We will hear the Champions League anthem in Donetsk." It feels like a dream. The stadium in his hometown has been abandoned for 10 years. But this conviction is the only thing that connects Akhmetov with his roots. The meaning of this story is deep. Akhmetov created an ideal instrument of influence, but he proved powerless before the power of artillery. He built an oasis of modern sports in a region that was rapidly plunging into a different reality. And this facility was one of the first to suffer. But the fact that the club has been preserved and has become a symbol of perseverance and volunteerism indicates that Akhmetov has drawn conclusions. Empires can collapse, factories can burn down, but symbols continue to live as long as people believe in them. The main complaint of the society against Rinat Akhmetov is that he did not take decisive action to protect Donbass. This argument is based on the comparison of two influential people and two neighboring regions. In Dnepropetrovsk, Igor Kolomoisky, with fewer resources than Akhmetov in Donetsk, stopped attempts at destabilization in a short time. He headed the region, allocated funds for the formation of volunteer units, and physically eliminated the threat. The Dnieper has remained stable. Why didn't Akhmetov do the same? In March of the 14th year, he was offered to take over the leadership of the Donetsk region. He was given complete freedom of action in personnel matters of the law enforcement system. It was only necessary to hold the edge. Akhmetov refused. Instead, he recommended his partner Sergei Taruta, an intelligent man who did not have the necessary influence and his own power structure. Experts believe that this refusal was caused not by a lack of courage, but by an unwillingness to become subordinate to the central government. Akhmetov is used to being above the situation, to being the one who manages the process rather than following orders. He feared that by taking one of the sides, he would lose the status of the undisputed leader for all residents of the region and become only a protege of Kiev. He sought to retain the role of mediator. Now let's imagine a different scenario. March of the 14th year. Akhmetov agrees to head the region. His security service, consisting of thousands of professionals, is gaining official status. Workers form detachments to maintain order. Any attempt to seize administrative buildings is thwarted by Akhmetov's people, who know the city thoroughly. Could this have prevented the conflict? Analysts' opinions differ. Some are sure that if Akhmetov had shown firmness in March, when the protests did not have mass support, external forces would not have been able to gain a foothold. Donbass would have remained part of the country, albeit under the full control of the oligarch. We would have received a territory with Akhmetov's special influence, but without war and destruction. Other experts are more skeptical. They point to an external factor. The decision to intervene was made at the highest level in the neighboring state. If Akhmetov had suppressed internal protests, external force would have been used earlier and on a larger scale. Akhmetov's guards would have been powerless against regular military units. In that case, he would have lost everything even faster. There is also a psychological moment. Akhmetov did not believe in the possibility of a full-scale clash. As a businessman, he believed that war was unprofitable because it destroyed the value of assets. He did not realize that he was dealing with forces for which political ambitions were higher than financial indicators. His rational approach was defeated by the irrationality of history. The difference between the situations in the two cities was not in the amount of resources, but in the determination of the leaders. One of them realized that this was a struggle for survival and went to the end. Another believed that this was a bargaining for authority and tried to leave room for maneuver. As a result, one city became the backbone of the state, and the other became the center of the territory, where the property of the one who tried to maintain neutrality was first seized. History does not tolerate assumptions, but Akhmetov's lesson is obvious. In times of global change, a neutral position is the most risky. By trying to save everything and not get into conflicts, you lose the opportunity to influence events. If Rinat Leonidovich had shown the will to power in March of the 14th year, perhaps events would have developed differently. But he chose a symbolic gesture over a real action, and this choice marked the beginning of the end of his undivided influence. In 2000, when the conflict in Donbass was in a stable phase and the world was facing a pandemic, Rinat Akhmetov made an acquisition that hit the real estate market. He bought a historic villa in the south of France for 200 million euros. This estate, formerly owned by the Belgian monarch Leopold II, is considered one of the most expensive private properties in the world. This step has caused sharp criticism in the society. Citizens did not understand the expediency of such spending on foreign luxury at a time when the country needed resources and the industry needed renovation. However, this act can be seen as an attempt to make up for what was lost. Having lost his real influence in his native land, Akhmetov acquired the scenery of his former greatness. He, who once commanded an entire region, sought to prove to himself and others that he retains his status, even in exile. Rinat Akhmetov's current existence resembles living in isolation. He has luxury real estate in London, a villa in France, and a secure residence near Kiev. However, he lacks the main thing, the feeling of home. He is deprived of the opportunity to visit Donetsk, where the graves of his loved ones are located. He can't go back to the places of his childhood. For a man whose personality is inextricably linked to his native land, this is a deep personal drama. He feels like a guest in the capital. Yes, extremely influential and wealthy, but still a stranger. Representatives of the Donetsk elite have not become their own in Kiev. Akhmetov is aware of this. He began to lead a closed lifestyle. If earlier he welcomed publicity, now he prefers privacy. His circle of contacts is limited only to the most trusted people. The main activity he is currently engaged in is the legal confrontation with Russia. He initiated a lawsuit in the International Court of Justice, demanding compensation for the destroyed plants. The claims amount to tens of billions of dollars. For him, it's a matter of principle. He understands the illusory chances of receiving these funds in the near future, but he needs to formalize his status as an injured party. This is a desire to clear your name for history. His role in the state has changed. He is no longer the one who determines the composition of the government and the content of laws. Legislative restrictions and the war have significantly reduced its capabilities. Now he acts as the largest investor and taxpayer. Its energy structures restore networks after impacts, incurring losses. His factories produce products for defense needs. Akhmetov became part of the country's overall survival mechanism. He no longer towers above the system. He is inside it, and depends on the overall success just like any citizen. The paradox of his fate is that the conflict, which he may have been able to stop at the very beginning, has become a determining factor in his current existence. He spends huge amounts of money to support the country, not because of a change of beliefs, but because only Ukraine's success guarantees him the preservation of his remaining capital and legitimacy. In case of failure, Akhmetov will lose everything and will remain only a wealthy pensioner abroad, a man with no future. His overseas villa is empty. Akhmetov prefers to stay in Ukraine, despite the risks. It is believed that he is afraid to leave the country for a long time, fearing to lose control of assets. The fear of loss that has been haunting him since the 90s has not disappeared. It just transformed. Previously, he was afraid of physical elimination, but now he is afraid of political decisions or missile strikes. Rinat Akhmetov is an iconic figure of the post-Soviet era, a person who has gone from poverty to the heights of success, only to end up in a situation of deep loneliness. He acquired everything that can be estimated in money, but lost the priceless, his small homeland and a sense of security. And no luxury on the Côte d'Azur can replace the sound of a working Donetsk enterprise, which has now gone silent forever. Rinat Akhmetov is not just a private individual. This is a living embodiment of the path of independent Ukraine over 3 decades. His biography exactly repeats the stages of the development of the state. He started out in need, just like the country itself in the early 90s. He went through severe trials, a period of accumulation of wealth, a time of relative stability, and then faced the catastrophe of war. It is a product of the system that has been created for 30 years. Today it is obvious that the events of the year 2022 put an end to the era of all-powerful oligarchs. Rinat Akhmetov is the last representative of that time who managed to survive in the new conditions. but found himself in a completely different environment. The conditions in which he dominated, corrupt ties, monopolies, access to cheap resources, are a thing of the past. In modern Ukraine, which depends on external support and requires transparency, previous management methods are more ineffective. International partners insist on legality, the army on effectiveness, and society on justice. Akhmetov, for all his flexibility, remains a man of a bygone era. His style, based on unity of command, is not suitable for the modern network society. What place will he occupy in history? The answer will be ambiguous, as will all his activities. On the one hand, he will remain a symbol of the unfair distribution of property, a man who used the labor of many generations, introduced controversial schemes, and hindered reforms for a long time. He is responsible for the political processes that led to the crisis. This guilt cannot be completely offset by charity. On the other hand, history will mark him as the creator of an outstanding football club that gave people hope, as an entrepreneur who did not leave the country at a critical moment and devoted his resources to its protection. Those who held the line at Azovstal will remember that it was his factory that became their fortress. And these structures, preserved by his team, have saved many lives. Rinat Akhmetov is a character in a large-scale drama. He aspired to unlimited influence and gained it, but the price turned out to be extremely high. He believed that finances would provide security, but the war proved otherwise. He dreamed of recognition and peace and love in his native land, but in the end, he found himself in a difficult situation, both there and there. He is viewed warily in Europe, and as an apostate in Donetsk. Its current position resembles a ship that has been damaged, but remains afloat thanks to the efforts of the crew. Akhmetov eliminates problems, gets rid of the ballast in the form of media assets and luxury goods, and saves the foundation of the business. He will keep his fortune, but he will never determine the fate of the country again. The time when one person could influence millions ended on February 24th. And there is a historical logic to this. Ukraine has outgrown the governance model from the 90s. It has become more complex and powerful than the interests of any major owner. Rinat Akhmetov, being among the ruins of his past, looks to the future, where he is assigned the role of a major investor, but not the arbiter of fate. And, probably, deep down he realizes that this is the best outcome after the decisions he made at the beginning of his journey. We are witnessing a time when foundations that seemed unshakable are crumbling. Akhmetov's biography confirms that money is a resource, but not true power. The real power lies in the will of the people, which cannot be acquired. If you want to understand how new ideas come to replace previous leaders and who will determine the face of tomorrow, follow our materials. We analyze the past in order to understand the contours of our common future.